The research station, Prometheus Rising, floated in the darkness of space like a small metal island. It circled a giant planet made of gas and storms in a star system far from Earth. The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across 17 different star systems. They were still young among the stars, still learning, still hopeful about what they might find. 12 scientists lived on the station. They were not soldiers. They were dreamers and thinkers. Dr. Elena Vasquez was their leader, a woman of 53 years with gray hair and kind eyes. She had spent her whole life hoping to find proof that humans were not alone in the universe. With her were biologists who studied alien life, linguists who prepared to learn new languages, and physicists who understood the secrets of space and time. 3 years ago, the station had detected a strange signal coming from deep space. It was not natural. It had a pattern, a rhythm, something that could only come from intelligent beings. Since that day, the 12 scientists had worked without rest. They decoded the signal. They learned its source. They waited for whoever had sent it. On the morning of March 15th, their waiting ended. The Valkyrie warship came out of fold space like a monster rising from dark water. It was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, covered in black armor that seemed to swallow light. The scientists watched it appear on their screens with wide eyes and shaking hands. Elena felt tears running down her face. This was the moment she had dreamed of since she was a little girl looking up at the stars. "Begin first contact protocol," she said. Her voice steady despite her racing heart. Marcus Chun, the station's physicist, started transmitting. They sent mathematical sequences first, the universal language of intelligent beings. They sent prime numbers. They sent the value of pi. They sent simple pictures showing a human figure with a hand raised in greeting. They sent their peaceful intentions in every way they could imagine. The Valkyrie ship did not respond. For 37 minutes, it simply hung in space, watching them. Elena told herself that the aliens were probably confused. They were probably trying to understand the transmissions. They were probably having their own debates about how to respond. She was wrong. The first plasma blast hit the station's communication array. Elena was thrown from her chair as the whole station shook. Alarms screamed. Red emergency lights flashed. She pulled herself up and looked at the screens, not understanding what she was seeing. "They're firing on us," Marcus said. His voice was calm, the way voices get when the mind cannot accept what is happening. "They're actually firing on us." Another blast ripped through the station's hull. The sound was terrible, a screaming of metal being torn apart. Dr. Sarah Kim, the youngest member of the team at only 28, ran toward the escape pods. But a third blast took out that entire section of the station. She was gone in an instant, along with 2 others. Elena activated the distress beacon. It would send an emergency signal through quantum-linked channels, reaching Earth in just hours. Then she ran to the main computer and began uploading everything, every file, every image, every recording. Whatever happened to them, the truth would survive. The Valkyrie boarding party came through the breach in the hull. They were tall, nearly 3 meters, with gray skin covered in small scales. Their eyes were black and cold, showing no emotion at all. They moved with perfect coordination, their weapons raised and ready. The scientists gathered together in the main laboratory. They had no weapons. They had never needed weapons. They raised their hands in surrender, in peace, in desperate hope. "We mean no harm," Elena said. "We come in peace. Please, we just want to talk." The Valkyrie leader looked at her. He tilted his head slightly, the way a person might look at an insect before crushing it. Then he raised his weapon and fired. Elena watched as Thomas Wright, the station's biologist, fell dead beside her. Then Anna Kowalski. Then James Okafor. One by one, the aliens executed her team. They were recording everything with devices attached to their armor, capturing each death with cold efficiency. Marcus grabbed Elena's hand. "Upload the footage," he whispered. "They have to know. Everyone has to see." She understood. With shaking fingers, she linked the station's internal cameras to the quantum buoy. Every moment of this horror would be transmitted to Earth. The whole of humanity would witness what was happening here. "I'm sorry," she said to Marcus as the Valkyrie turned their weapons toward them. "I thought they would be different. I thought they would be better." "You couldn't have known," he replied. The alien fired. Marcus fell. Elena was the last one standing. She looked at the Valkyrie leader and saw nothing in those black eyes. No hatred, no anger, no regret. They were killing her people the way a farmer might clear weeds from a field. It meant nothing to them. "You will regret this," she said quietly. "You don't know what you've started." The Valkyrie did not understand her words, but it would not have mattered if he did. He saw a weak creature from a weak species. He saw prey. He saw nothing worth considering. The final shot echoed through the dying station. 6 hours later, the quantum buoy's transmission reached Earth. It was received by a communications officer named David Okonkwo, the nephew of Admiral James Okonkwo. He watched the footage once, then ran to his uncle's office. 12 hours after that, every human in settled space had seen what happened on Prometheus Rising. They watched Elena Vasquez and her team raise their hands in peace. They watched the aliens record their executions like trophies. They watched 12 innocent scientists die for the crime of wanting to say hello. Something changed in humanity that day. It was not visible at first. It was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, deep, and terrible. It was the sound of 7 billion people across 17 star systems, all arriving at the same conclusion. The Valkyrie had made their intentions clear. There would be no negotiation. There would be no peaceful coexistence. There would only be the strong and the dead. Humanity decided, in that moment of shared horror and grief, which one they would be. Admiral James Okonkwo stood in his office and watched the footage for the 7th time. Elena Vasquez had been his student at the Naval Academy 20 years ago. She had been brilliant and kind and full of hope for the future. Now she was dead, and her killers were out there among the stars, thinking themselves safe. He closed his eyes and made a silent promise to her memory. They would not be safe for long. The United Terran Council met in the Great Chamber on Earth, a building made of white stone and glass that had hosted humanity's leaders for over 200 years. 300 representatives from every colony and settlement filled the seats. They shouted at each other. They pounded on tables. They demanded action, revenge, blood. Admiral James Okonkwo sat in the military section and said nothing. He watched the chaos with quiet eyes. His face showed no emotion, but inside his chest, something cold and hard was growing. It felt like iron. It felt like purpose. "We must strike back immediately," shouted a representative from Mars. "They murdered our people." "We don't know their strength," argued another from the Jupiter stations. "We could be starting a war we cannot win. They already started the war." Someone screamed from the back. The debate went on for hours. Some wanted to negotiate. Perhaps it was a mistake, they said. Perhaps it was a rogue ship. Perhaps the Valkyrie did not represent their whole civilization. Perhaps there was still a chance for peace. Admiral Okonkwo knew better. He had studied war his entire life. He had seen the footage 100 times now. The way the aliens moved, the way they recorded the kills, the cold efficiency of their execution. This was not a mistake. This was policy. This was how they did things. 3 days after the massacre, the Valkyrie answered the question themselves. Their transmission came on all frequencies, broadcast across every communication system humanity possessed. The message was simple. Their language had been partially decoded from the original signal, and human computers translated the words with cold precision. The vermin have been cleansed from our territory. Let this serve as warning. Humanity will remain in its cradle or be exterminated. You exist because we allow it. You will end because we demand it. The council chamber fell silent. 300 representatives stared at each other with pale faces. The hope for peace, the dream of misunderstanding, died in that moment. Admiral Okonkwo stood up. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. Now, he said quietly, we know where we stand. The days that followed changed humanity forever. It was as if the species had been sleeping, divided by old conflicts and petty disagreements, and now woke up to find a common enemy at the door, on Mars. Manufacturing plants that had operated at half capacity for decades suddenly roared to full production. Workers volunteered for double shifts, then triple shifts. They made weapons, ships, armor, everything the military needed. No one had to order them. No one had to force them. They had seen the footage. They remembered the 12 names. On the colony world of New Shanghai, scientists who had been competing with each other for years suddenly shared all their research. Old rivalries were forgotten overnight. A physicist from one university walked into the lab of his greatest competitor and handed over 30 years of secret work. We don't have time for this anymore, he said. None of us do. On Earth, young people lined up at military recruitment centers. The lines stretched for kilometers. They waited for hours in the sun and rain, patient and determined. They were not angry, not screaming for revenge. They were quiet. That was what frightened the officers processing their applications. The silence was more terrifying than any rage. The Velthari watched all of this from their distant empire. Their spies and sensors picked up the increased activity, the mobilization, the sudden unity of a previously fractured species. They analyzed the data and came to a simple conclusion. The humans were afraid. They were preparing defenses. They would cower in their little corner of the galaxy and hope to survive. The Velthari High Command made a decision. They would give the humans 1 year to build up their pathetic defenses. Then they would come with a great fleet and finish what they had started. It would be good training for their younger warriors. The destruction of a weak species was always useful for building experience. They did not understand humanity at all. Admiral Okonkwo spent those months planning. He did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. He gathered the best minds in the military around him and asked them one simple question. How do we win? They showed him the numbers. The Velthari Dominion had conquered 32 species across 4,000 years. They controlled over 200 star systems. Their fleet was 10 times the size of humanity's. Their technology was more advanced. Their soldiers were stronger, faster, better equipped. So we cannot win a straight fight, Okonkwo said. Good. I wasn't planning on fighting one. He began studying everything humanity knew about war. Not just the clean wars of the modern age, but the terrible conflicts of the past. Stalingrad, where soldiers fought with broken bottles in frozen ruins rather than surrender. The guerrilla campaigns of Vietnam and Afghanistan, where farmers defeated empires. The resistance movements of occupied nations, where ordinary people became weapons. Humanity had been fighting itself for 10,000 years. They had developed every trick, every strategy, every form of warfare that the mind could conceive. The Velthari thought this made them weak, divided, primitive. They were wrong. Meanwhile, Admiral Okonkwo's nephew, David, transferred from communications to the Marine Corps. He was 24 years old, tall and strong like his uncle, with the same quiet determination in his eyes. You don't have to do this, his uncle told him privately. There are other ways to serve. I watched them die, David replied. I was the one who received the transmission. I saw Dr. Vasquez fall. I heard her last words. I need to do this. The Admiral understood. He did not try to stop him. Across settled space, similar conversations were happening in millions of homes. Parents watched their children volunteer for combat. Husbands and wives said goodbye to their partners. Everyone knew what was coming. Everyone had made their choice. The Council held a final vote to authorize military action. It passed unanimously, 300-0. Not a single voice called for negotiation anymore. The Valkyrie had made their position clear. They would accept nothing less than humanity's submission or extinction. Humanity chose a third option. Admiral Okonkwo stood before the assembled representatives and spoke the words that would define the coming years. They think we are weak because we have been divided. They think we are prey because we sought peace. They will learn that humanity's divisions were not weakness, but practice. We have spent 10,000 years learning how to fight. Now we will show them what we learned. He turned to face the giant screen that showed the stars, showing the Valkyrie Dominion marked in red. They wanted a war, he said quietly. They will get one. May God have mercy on them, because we will not. The chamber erupted in cheers. But Admiral Okonkwo did not smile. He knew what was coming. He knew the cost they would pay. He knew that many of the young faces cheering now would never grow old. But he also knew something else. He knew that humanity would not go quietly into the dark. He knew that the Valkyrie had awakened something ancient and terrible. Something that had been sleeping in the human soul since the first caveman picked up a rock and decided not to die. The countdown to war had begun. The Valkyrie Dominion had ruled the stars for 4,000 years. They had conquered 32 different species and absorbed them into their empire. Their strategy was simple and perfect. They found young civilizations still growing, still weak. They crushed them before they could become threats. They took what was useful and destroyed the rest. This had never failed. Not once in 4,000 years. Admiral Sixton commanded the Valkyrie border fleet from his massive warship, the Eternal Conquest. He was old by Valkyrie standards, nearly 200 years, and had personally overseen the destruction of 3 species. He considered the coming human campaign to be a simple matter. The vermin would build their defenses, his fleet would break them, and the galaxy would forget humanity had ever existed. He was preparing for a defensive war. He expected the humans to hide behind their fortifications and pray for mercy. The attack on Kethron proved him wrong. Kethron was a Valkyrie border world, home to 40 million citizens and a major military shipyard. It was well defended, protected by orbital stations and a fleet of 50 warships. The Valkyrie considered it completely secure. The human fleet arrived on a Thursday morning, local time. There were 300 ships, everything humanity could gather. Admiral Okonkwo commanded from the TDN Prometheus, a new battleship named in honor of the destroyed research station. The Valkyrie defenders expected probing attacks, careful testing of their defenses. This is what civilizations always did when facing the Dominion. They were cautious. They were afraid. They preserved their forces and looked for weaknesses. Admiral Okonkwo ordered a full assault. Every human ship charged forward at maximum speed, weapons firing continuously. The Valkyrie commanders were so shocked that it took them precious seconds to respond. In space combat, seconds meant everything. The first wave of human ships crashed into the Valkyrie defensive line like a hammer. 15 human vessels were destroyed in the first minutes. But they took 30 Valkyrie ships with them, and they created a gap in the enemy formation. More human ships poured through that gap. They did not stop to consolidate. They did not pause to regroup. They pushed forward with what the Valkyrie would later describe as insane aggression. The marine transports reached the orbital stations while the space battle still raged. Sergeant David Okonkwo was among the first wave of soldiers to board the enemy facilities. He was 24 years old, the nephew of the admiral, and he had trained for this moment for 11 months. The Valkyrie soldiers inside the station were confident. They were larger than humans, stronger, with faster reflexes. They had never lost a boarding action in recorded history. They did not understand what they were facing. The humans came through the breaches, screaming ancient battle cries. They fought with a fury that the Valkyrie had never seen. When their weapons ran empty, they fought with knives. When their knives broke, they fought with their hands. They did not surrender. They did not retreat. They kept coming until they were dead, and even then, some of them used their final breath to trigger grenades. David's squad fought their way to the station's command center. 7 of his 12 soldiers died along the way. He killed 9 Valkyrie personally, the last one with a broken piece of metal torn from the wall. When reinforcements finally reached him, he was sitting among the bodies, covered in blood that was both red and gray. "The station is ours," he reported calmly. "Shipyard is next." The battle for Kethran lasted 19 hours. When it ended, the planet was burning. Every Valkyrie ship was destroyed or captured. Every orbital station was in human hands. The shipyard, the pride of the border fleet, was nothing but debris. 43,000 humans died in the battle. It was a terrible cost. But the Valkyrie losses were worse. Nearly 200,000 soldiers and sailors dead. 50 warships gone. A major world conquered. For the first time in 4,000 years, the Dominion had lost a battle. Admiral Sixth received the news in disbelief. He watched the sensor recordings again and again, trying to understand what he was seeing. The humans should not have attacked. They should have defended their own territory. They should have been afraid. "They are insane," one of his officers said. No rational species would accept such losses for a single victory. Sixth said nothing. He was beginning to understand something terrible. The humans were not insane. They were simply different. They measured cost and benefit by different standards. They were willing to pay prices that no other species would consider. This made them dangerous in ways the Dominion had never faced. Back on the conquered world of Kethran, Admiral Okonkwo walked through the ruins of the capital city. The bodies had not yet been cleared. The fires still burned in places. The smell of death hung heavy in the air. "Sir," one of his officers said carefully, "some of our people are questioning the intensity of our approach. The civilian casualties." Okonkwo stopped walking. He turned to face the young officer with eyes that held no warmth. "Show me the footage again," he said quietly. "Sir?" "The footage from Prometheus Rising." "Show it to me." The officer pulled up the recording on his portable screen. They watched together as Elena Vasquez and her team raised their hands in peace. They watched as the Valkyrie executed them one by one, recording each death like a trophy. "They set the rules," Okonkwo said when it was over. "They decided there would be no mercy, no quarter, no negotiation. We did not choose this war. We did not want it. But now that it is here, we will fight it on their terms." He looked back at the burning city. They killed 12 scientists who only wanted to say hello. Now they will learn what humanity does when pushed. Every death they caused, we will repay 1,000 times. Every world they threatened, we will take. Every ship they sent against us, we will destroy. The officer was silent for a long moment. "The other species in their empire," he finally said. "The ones they conquered. Our intelligence says many of them are watching what happens here." Okonkwo nodded slowly. This was something he had considered. "Yes," he said. "Let them watch. Let them see that the Dominion can be beaten. Let them see that their masters are not gods." He turned and walked back toward his shuttle. And when the time is right, let them see that humanity remembers who was cruel and who was kind. The Velthari will find no allies among us, but those who are forced to serve them, they may find something else. The war was just beginning, but the message of Kethran spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The humans had done what no one thought possible. They had struck first, struck hard, and won in the conquered territories of the Dominion. Enslaved species whispered to each other in the dark. They spoke a new word, a word that had not meant anything before hope. 3 years had passed since the massacre at Prometheus Rising. 3 years of war. 3 years of blood and fire and death on a scale that humanity had never known. The Velthari High Command gathered in their ancient council chamber on the homeworld. The room was carved from black stone, lit by floating crystals that cast cold blue light. 12 high admirals sat around the central table, their faces showing emotions that Velthari rarely displayed. Fear, confusion, anger. The humans have taken 14 of our systems, reported Admiral Sixton. His voice was steady, but his claws scraped against the table. Our losses now exceed 4 million soldiers. The border territories are collapsing. This is impossible, said High Admiral Virketh, the oldest member of the council. We have conquered 32 species. We have ruled for 4,000 years. How can these primitives be defeating us? The question hung in the air. None of them had an answer. Meanwhile, on a damaged Velthari cruiser drifting between stars, Captain Maya Rodriguez was about to die. Her fighter had been shot down during the Battle of Nexus Prime. She had been captured by a Velthari patrol and brought before their commander, Admiral Sixton himself. The interrogation room was cold. Maya's hands were bound behind her back. Blood dripped from a cut on her forehead. She had been beaten, but she had not broken. She would not break. Sixton studied her with his cold black eyes. He had killed hundreds of humans personally over the past 3 years. But this one interested him. She had destroyed 6 Velthari ships before being shot down. She had killed 11 soldiers during her capture. Even now, broken and bleeding, there was no fear in her eyes. Why? He asked finally. His translators turned his words into something she could understand. Why do you fight so hard? You cannot win. Even if you win every battle, we have more ships, more soldiers, more resources. In the end, mathematics will destroy you. Maya laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. You still don't understand, do you? She said, you think this is about winning. What else would it be about? Justice, revenge, proving a point. She leaned forward despite her injuries. You killed 12 scientists. 12 peaceful researchers who just wanted to say hello. And you recorded it. You sent that recording to us like a trophy. Sixton remembered. He had not been there personally, but he had approved of the action. It was standard Dominion procedure for dealing with emerging species. That was a warning, he said. A demonstration of power. It should have taught your species to stay in your place. You want to know what it actually taught us? Maya's smile was sharp as a knife. It taught us that you would never accept our existence. It taught us that negotiation was pointless. It taught us that we had nothing to lose. She started coughing, blood flecking her lips. My grandmother survived something called the Holocaust. She continued when she could speak again. My grandfather escaped something called the killing fields. My family has been through horrors you cannot imagine. And we survived. We always survive. Because when you back humans into a corner, when you give us no hope of peace, we become something else. What? Monsters. The word hung in the air. We become worse than our enemies. We match their cruelty and exceed it. We burn everything they love and salt the ashes. You wanted to exterminate us? You created your own executioners. Sixton felt something he had rarely experienced in his 200 years of life. Uncertainty. This was not how conquered species behaved. They begged. They bargained. They submitted. "You will die here," he said finally. "I know," Maya replied. "But I'll take as many of you with me as I can." She twisted her body in a way that should have been impossible, bringing her bound hands around to her chest. There was a small device hidden there, sewn into her flight suit. A thermal charge powerful enough to vaporize everything within 20 meters. "For the 12, she said. The explosion destroyed the interrogation room, killed 11 Velthari soldiers, and wounded Admiral Sixton severely. He survived only because his guards threw themselves over him at the last moment. As he recovered in a medical facility, he received reports of the war's progress. They were uniformly terrible, that the humans adapted faster than any enemy the Dominion had ever faced. Weapons that worked in one battle were countered in the next. Tactics that seemed sound were anticipated and destroyed. The humans learned from every defeat and came back stronger. Worse, they were unpredictable. Sometimes they would sacrifice ships and lives for seemingly worthless objectives. Other times they would abandon valuable targets without a fight. Their commanders took insane risks that sometimes failed catastrophically, but often produced stunning victories. The Dominion's models could not predict their behavior because their behavior followed no model. It was chaos. It was madness. And it was working. 2 colony worlds had been lost to the humans. The population of the border territories was fleeing deeper into Dominion space. The subject species, those 32 civilizations that the Velthari had conquered over the millennia, were growing restless. They saw the humans winning. They saw their masters bleeding. Admiral Sixth then understood now what they had awakened. The humans were not a rational enemy. They were a force of nature. They were a fire that would burn until there was nothing left to burn. On the other side of the front lines, Admiral Okonkwo received word of Captain Rodriguez's death. He added her name to a list that had grown far too long. Hundreds of thousands of names. Soldiers, sailors, pilots. Civilians killed when the Velthari bombed human colony worlds. Children who would never grow up. Parents who would never come home. The cost was terrible. Some nights, Okonkwo could not sleep. He walked the corridors of his ship and thought about all the letters he had written to grieving families. But he did not waver. He did not doubt. The Velthari had made their choice when they killed the 12. They had decided that humanity was prey to be exterminated. Every death in this war, on both sides, was a consequence of that decision. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving something from Dominion space. It's coming from multiple locations." Okonkwo looked at the data. Dozens of transmissions from inside Velthari territory. They were coded, carefully hidden from Dominion surveillance. "The subject species," his intelligence officer explained. "They're reaching out to us. They want to help." Okonkwo allowed himself a small smile. This was what he had been waiting for. The Velthari had conquered 32 civilizations, but they had never truly broken them. Those species remembered their freedom. They remembered their dead. And now they saw the humans bleeding their masters, and they wanted to join the fight. "Coordinate with them," Okonkwo ordered. "Share intelligence. Plan joint operations. Tell them that humanity remembers who was forced to fight and who chose to fight." The war was about to change. The Velthari had ruled through fear for 4,000 years. Now that fear was turning against them. From their prison worlds and slave colonies, the conquered species began to move. They sabotaged Velthari ships. They fed information to human commanders. They prepared for the day when they could rise up and claim their freedom. The reckoning was coming. And the Velthari, for the first time in their long history, were afraid. Velthar Prime, was the most beautiful world in the known galaxy. It had stood at the center of the Dominion for 4,000 years, a symbol of absolute power and eternal victory. Massive cities of black stone and silver metal covered its surface. Gardens of alien flowers bloomed in eternal spring. Monuments to conquered enemies lined the great avenues. Trophies of 32 dead civilizations that no enemy had ever reached. Belther Prime. No enemy had ever dared to try. Admiral James. Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the TDN Prometheus and looked at the planet through the main view screen. Around him, the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled hung in the darkness of space. 500 warships. 2 million soldiers in transport vessels. Every weapon that human industry could produce. All ships report ready, Admiral, his flag captain said quietly. Okonkwo nodded. He thought of Elena Vasquez and her team, raising their hands in peace before the Velthari guns. He thought of the 3 years of war that had followed. He thought of the names on his list, the hundreds of thousands who had died to bring humanity to this moment. The Velthari High Council was transmitting on all frequencies. Their message was desperate, panicked, everything that they had never been before. "We offer negotiation," their spokesman said. "We offer reparations. We offer territory, resources, whatever you demand. Please, let us discuss peace." Okonkwo listened to the translation in silence. His officers watched him, waiting for his response. 3 years ago, he finally said, "You killed 12 scientists who only wanted to say hello. When they raised their hands in peace, you shot them down and recorded it. When they begged for mercy, you laughed." He paused, remembering the footage that had started everything. "You sent that recording to us as a message. You wanted us to know that negotiation was impossible. You wanted us to understand that you would never accept our existence. You wanted us to be afraid." His voice was calm, steady, without anger. "That made it worse. We got your message. Now you will get ours." He cut the transmission and turned to his flag captain. "Begin the bombardment." The orbital assault on Velthar Prime lasted 6 days. Human ships rained fire on military installations, shipyards, command centers, and fortifications. The great monuments to conquered species were blasted into rubble. The proud towers of the High Council were reduced to ash. The Velthari fleet, what remained of it, tried to defend their homeworld. They fought with the desperation of cornered animals. For the first time, they threw themselves into battle with no regard for their own survival. They finally understood how humans had been fighting all along. It was not enough. David Okonkwo, now a major, led the first Marine units onto the surface. He was 31 years old. His hair had gone gray from the stress of 3 years of constant combat. Half the soldiers he had started the war with were dead. But he was still fighting. The battle for the capital city was brutal. The Velthari soldiers fought to the last, defending every building, every street, every room. They knew there would be no mercy. They had made sure of that themselves 3 years ago, when they showed the galaxy what they did to helpless prisoners. Major Okonkwo reached the ruins of the High Council chamber on the final day. The 12 High Admirals were dead, killed either in the bombardment or by their own hands. Only Admiral Sixth remained alive. His gray scales covered in dust and blood. The old Velthari looked at the young human with something almost like respect. "You were right," Sixth said through his translator. "We awakened something terrible. We thought we were facing another weak species to be crushed. We did not understand what humanity truly was." David did not respond immediately. He was thinking of a communications console on Earth, where he had watched 12 scientists die. He was thinking of the years since, the friends lost, the horrors witnessed. What are we? He finally asked. Sixth's black eyes were empty, defeated. "Survivors," he said. You are a species forged in constant war against yourselves. Every conflict made you stronger. Every tragedy made you harder. You do not have the luxury of peace, because you never learned to stop fighting. He gestured at the destruction around them. We ruled for 4,000 years, because we were strong enough to crush everyone who opposed us. You will probably rule for much longer, not because you are stronger, but because you can endure what others cannot. David raised his weapon. Any last words? Tell your people this, Sixton said. Tell them to be careful with their power. We became monsters because we believed our strength gave us the right. In the end, that belief destroyed us. The shot echoed through the ruined chamber. When the battle was over, the historians began their count. 4.7 million Velthari dead over 3 years of war. An empire that had stood for 4,000 years collapsed in less than 4. 32 species, once enslaved, now free to build their own futures. The human losses were smaller, but no less painful. 780,000 dead. 2 colony worlds destroyed. Cities burned, families shattered. A generation scarred by what they had seen and done. Admiral Okonkwo gave his final address from the steps of the ruined High Council. Behind him, human and allied flags flew over the conquered capital. Around him, soldiers from a dozen different species stood together, united by their shared enemy. We did not want this war, he said. His voice carried across the galaxy by every transmitter that still functioned. We reached out with open hands and hopeful hearts, and they answered with fire. So hear me now, all of you watching from your hidden worlds. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Humanity is not a threat to those who meet us in peace. We will trade with you. We will learn from you. We will grow alongside you. The species freed from the Dominion are our allies and our friends. Together we will build something better than what came before. His eyes hardened. But if you come for us with violence, if you try to exterminate us as the Velthari did, if you give us no choice but war, then know this. We will make you regret it for the rest of your very short history. 200 years later, humanity was the dominant power in the known galaxy. Not because they conquered, but because no one dared to challenge them. The lesson of the Velthari was remembered by every civilization that rose and fell. On every human world, monuments stood to the 12. The scientists who had died reaching out for peace had become symbols of something greater. They represented both the best of humanity and the trigger for its most terrible war. Children learned their names in school. Elena Vasquez, Marcus Chun, Sarah Kim, all 12, forever remembered. And in the deep spaces between stars, other civilizations watched humanity with careful eyes. They saw a species that valued peace but excelled at war. They saw people who had suffered greatly and inflicted suffering in return. They saw something to admire and something to fear. The wise ones learned the same lesson the Velthari had learned too. Do not start a war you cannot finish. Do not attack those who have. Nothing left to lose. And never, ever underestimate humans. Because once they decided to fight, they did not stop until the fighting was done. That was the nature of humanity. It was their greatest strength and their darkest truth. The 12 had died hoping for peace. Their deaths had brought war beyond imagination. But in the end, perhaps, their sacrifice had achieved what they always wanted. A galaxy where humanity could reach out to the stars without fear. A galaxy that had learned, through blood and fire, that humans were here to stay.